Girl, real talk. This whole "it's new year, time to reinvent myself" trash is not the vibe for 2024. You can find someone who loves you for you, as you are. You don't need to read a stack of self-help books, only eat sad salads, or start meditating at 5 a.m. to be ready for dating. So yeah, my advice is to download Bumble and find someone who embraces you the way you are right now. Let me know how it goes.
Join me, 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty, on my podcast, My Life of Crime, as I take on true crime investigations like no other. This season, I'm looking into the labyrinth of crime and secrets within families. I'm cutting straight to the evidence and talking to the people directly involved, including investigators and the families of victims. Listen to My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty wherever you get your podcasts.
A note to listeners. The following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
I feel like it's crazy that they didn't ask him where he was at every single moment of that night, because two people to this day still are gone. I don't think KXII will ever forget about Molly and Colt.
They have eyewitnesses that saw her tied to a tree, and apparently one that actually saw what happened to her. That's huge. FBI has the gun, but I don't know if they did any tests on it. Did they look in the barrel for DNA? Did they swab it? I don't know.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman. The main reason we are doing this podcast is to get the word out and keep Molly and Colt's story alive.
From the beginning, KXII followed the story, and even though the reporters have changed, their commitment to Molly and Colt continues. One of the reporters who has been following updates on the case is Caroline Cluiss.
We're happy to have her as our guest this week. Let's call her.
Caroline, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
We're so
thank you.
excited to have you.
Absolutely.
We wanted to start off by asking you a little bit about yourself, how long you've been a journalist, when did you come to KXII, and how long have you been in that area?
I've been here 2 years. I started my journalism career here, and I just signed on for 2 more. So this was my first place out of college. I went to UNT. I was in the Mayborn School of Journalism, which I loved. I'm originally from Dallas, the Dallas area, so I didn't go too far. It's nice, close to home.
That's nice.
Cool.
So did you hear about the Molly Miller Colt Haynes case before you went to KXII?
No, actually, I had never heard about it until, I guess, one of my first days when I was training in Sherman. And our anchor at the time was like, okay, you got to learn about the John Grisham, the innocent man. You got to learn about Tiger King, and you got to learn about Molly Miller. Those are the 3 things that I will be covering. That was my first time hearing of it.
What did you think when you heard about that story?
I mean, there's a lot of crazy things in that story. I guess I feel like the craziest thing to me, and I do enjoy true crime, so I feel like I have a fairly good sense of what investigators across the country do when things happen. And I feel like it's crazy that they didn't ask him where he was at every single moment of that night, because 2 people to this day still are gone. No one knows where. And I just feel like, I don't know, like comparing it to the serial, that murder, they really broke down where that guy was, and he had an answer for it. And I would love to see something similar happen with Hunnit.
Wouldn't it be great if someone could just sit him down and go through that hour by hour with him of that night?
Yeah, it would. I think that would be very enlightening.
From the second he left the police, because they were chasing him all the way down to the end of the road. What happened after that? Where did he go? What did he do? I mean, that's one of our major questions.
Yeah, and they didn't talk to him until almost 3 to 4 weeks after, and his cousin or kin was the sheriff. And all I got was a statement from him, which we read on the podcast, which didn't really help all that much.
Yeah, it's still pretty cloudy after that.
It's still very cloudy. And then they lawyered up when they wanted to officially talk to them. So no one's ever really heard from them. But we're hearing it from other people, so which has been great. But the podcast is really it's given the area an outlet to be able to talk freely. For some people, they're anonymous. Some people don't want to be anonymous. They want to be known. So it's been really nice to see the outpouring of help for Molly's family.
Yeah, I've listened to, I think I've caught up with all the episodes, and I think y'all are doing a great job. So
thank you.
It's very interesting.
It's been really intense, especially trying to help Paula. So I know that you've been helping her too, which is great. Because another question I have, as I'm a former journalist, one of the things that really has bothered me about these kinds of cases from the beginning is how they don't really get national attention unless they're a college student or fits a certain profile. And I think it's great that your station has always followed this case, because we did do an interview with Maureen Kane, who was an anchor there for a long time for the TV show, which was amazing. So I don't know, I was just kind of wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I don't think KXII will ever forget about Molly and Colt. When I first walked into my office here, the missing poster is still above my desk to this day. So it made it pretty clear to me that we want this solved, and we're gonna keep doing those stories with Paula until that happens.
So what's significant about this week is it's the anniversary. So are you guys planning anything?
Yeah, I've got a couple. I've been speaking with Paula a little bit, trying to figure out, what can we do to make this year different? Because we've done a lot of stories with her about she's not here. We still don't know where she is. We still don't have answers. And I don't want to do the same story again. Obviously, I want it to be solved, but I'm trying to figure out, what can I do? Are there more records requests I can make? What can I do to kind of, I guess, make a push? Because, I do feel like ever since I'd heard about this, she would be 3 years older than me. And so I feel like kind of connected to her. I just feel like I want to do this. I want to do it for her family. And I want to do a different story this year and see if anything comes out of it.
Well, you're part of her generation. So I can see how you can identify with her. And she just kind of vanished off the planet. And I just can't understand why there's not more of a law enforcement push to find out what happened. And I think that area has a stranglehold of secrecy that I think that one of the reasons we wanted to do the podcast after we did the documentary about it for Oxygen was that we felt like there really wasn't anything being done. I know behind the scenes, I'm sure there's a lot being done that we're not being told. But I think also, if it wasn't for Paula, this case would be a cold case a year after it happened. And now we're coming into the 9th year, and there's still so many questions that need to be answered. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to unearth all this stuff with Paula. And she's done an amazing job being an investigator. We deal with professional investigators all day long, FBI, all types of investigators in the programming that we do. And the thoroughness and the courageousness and the tenacity this woman has shown over this time has been unheralded. I've never seen it before. She's the only person I can kind of, every time I think about trying to compare someone, reminds me of Erin Brockovich, that story that, Julie Roberts played and that she won an Oscar for, where she was unrelenting and she had no fear, and she was going to do what was right. And that's what she's been doing through this whole thing. And so that's why we wanted to help and get the word out. And hopefully, right now, we've only been up for about 6 weeks, and we're about 25,000 downloads. So,
yeah, that's great.
And so the audience is there. And I would say 80% of that audience is from southeastern Oklahoma.
Absolutely.
And
that's why you guys are really important too.
And northern Texas.
Because I think working in conjunction with a local station like yourself really helps get the word out there that we're doing this. People are still looking at this case. It's not over.
Yeah.
So people that actually were involved should be aware of that.
Exactly.
What did you think of the search warrant denial that just happened?
I was really confused by that. And when I read the statement from Marty Grisham, it didn't sound to me like it did sound like it came from the judge, not his office, right? The denial. But I was very confused because I feel like everyone I know here in Southern Oklahoma, everyone has their ideas about what happened, who did it. But I don't think anyone's confused about whether or not a crime was committed at this point. I feel like that's pretty much people know that something happened, something that was not accidental, or even if something was accidental to begin with, something happened to cover that up. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think one of the deaths may have been accidental. I think the other one was just a way to cover it up because, and everyone says the same thing. Molly was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The guys that she was hanging out with were dealing drugs. They were around drugs. They were around that element. And I think her being there at that time was not good. And I think she was just a wild child looking for the next good time. She wanted to party and she got in the wrong car.
Yeah, so sad.
It's so sad.
Since you've heard the podcast, you realized why the warrant got turned down. What do you think of that? Because they didn't want to affect the environment. What are your feelings about why that was turned down?
Oh, I think that's, I don't know. So many things that we do or we see as journalists being done every day affect the environment and aren't for solving a case like this. It's odd, I guess.
It's odd because it's just dirt and they were going to replace the dirt.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
It was bizarre. So we all thought it was bizarre. And I don't know how much you know about the political structure in that area. Obviously, it's small town Oklahoma and it's a bunch of counties together, but something doesn't smell right. It seems like there's other forces in play here.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I've been curious about that as well, because obviously the former sheriff is no longer the sheriff. Marty Grisham even is no longer the sheriff. So I'm interested to see if there are any changes after that. Like, it seems like the sheriff is pretty much the guy who makes the law of the land in counties for the most part. So now that Joe Russell is gone, I'm not sure who people would be scared of, other than, I guess, retaliation from others, I guess.
Yeah, I'm surprised that people have been able to keep this secret for so long, because there's more than, obviously, Khan's not the only one involved here.
Yeah, from listening to what y'all have been told, tips and things, because I had always thought it'll come out someday when someone gets drunk or someone just gets reckless or something. But it sounds like people have been talking. They have gotten drunk or reckless or whatever, but it's still not coming to light, which is odd.
Yeah,
it's odd to us too. I mean, we're listening to these people give us information and we haven't even released all of it. It's shocking information and very graphic. And for the details. And the details are kind of really lining up with a lot of the stuff that happened in the first 2 weeks of the investigation. So for us, we always go back to the beginning because we feel like that's really where all your clues are. And no one seems to be taking it seriously. And that's what's a little unnerving for us, because we don't understand. We've asked them to listen to this stuff again. No one's responded. Yeah. Which is strange, because we work with different agencies all over the country.
We've worked with all the agencies
and
before.
We've never had someone just blatantly ignore us like that.
Yeah, and I even called some of my contacts in all these different alphabet agencies, FBI, US Marshals, and everything, and I'll run stuff by them. They're retired now, and they're like confused. Like, why would they follow up on that? I mean, granted, there's an enormous amount of caseload in those small offices, and I give them that. But even they said, even if they were overwhelmed, if they have a tip that's a hot tip, why wouldn't they vet it out? Why wouldn't they go search that pond? Why wouldn't they go search? Why won't they get to push for the warrant to go search the NIPS property, which still hasn't been searched to this day? And the burn pit, which is not even on the NIPS property, has been looked at, but it hasn't been forensically looked at. I mean, there was apparently OSBI took some soil samples. No one knows what happened to them. No one knows what happened to them. It was fished out with a Mountain Dew can, and like no forensic evidence has ever been really recovered. And that's why Paula has been so important in this case, because she's the only one following up on all this stuff.
Yeah.
One really pounding the pavement, and this is the woman's a housewife.
So when you say that you haven't heard back about these, like you said, you were telling them to go over stuff and stuff like that, have you not heard back at all? Like,
Paula
not
hasn't
even
heard back. Paula's taken the lead on it.
No, she has not.
She reached out to the FBI, was probably about a month ago, right when we first started doing this, and asked them. They had interviewed this one person, and Paula had a recording of an alternative interview that she did, and she said that she was going to release the tapes onto the podcast, and that if you have any issues with it, call us back. And they have not called us back. And that's
interesting.
At least a month. And that's when I called my friends who are former homicide detectives and former U.S. Marshals and investigators. And I was like, what should I do? What should we do? We're not getting here back. And they're shocked.
What do you think it's going to take in order to find answers in this case? Do you have any?
I don't know. And I wonder all the time about that. I mean, not constantly, but pretty regularly. I don't know. Because if you can't get on to the property to do another search, I have no idea.
Jackie Bates, the investigative, he had the best scenario there. He said Khan was the last person to see them both. He said that he should be at least negligent homicide. I think that's what the terms of the case we use. You have at least that, because they've been declared dead. And he was the last person to see them. And we know for a fact that he spoke to them after the fact, because Joe Russell's statement that he took from Khan said so. So,
well, in Oklahoma, we have degrees of murder too. So first degree, I guess, is, you intend to kill someone. And then I believe second degree is, and I have not looked this up in a while, so it might not be quite right, but I believe it's if you're committing another felony and someone dies during that, then you get second degree, or manslaughter if it's a misdemeanor and someone dies while you're doing that.
Yeah, it wasn't intentional. It was an accident.
Yeah, but even if you, I think, and I've done I've covered some cases on it. I think that even if you didn't mean to, and it was a felony that you were committing, then you can still get a murder charge from it in Oklahoma.
Well, it just seems like no one's really doing anything about it at this point.
Yeah. And honestly, not hearing, like, there are some law enforcement agencies here that I work really well with. And, I have great working relationships with them, but there are others who just never call me back. And it is the most frustrating thing. And there are things we could do about it if it gets bad enough, but that sounds very on track with my day-to-day reporting, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, we're the same. Like, people always call us back. We deal with law enforcement all the time. But in this case particular, we've had a lot of roadblocks.
Yeah.
I mean, Paula calls them all the time. And then, and she gets, and most of the time she's calling them to give them information. And then she doesn't get any follow-up as far as whether or not it was followed up. And, and they can hide behind the cloak of this is an open investigation, which is all well and good. I mean, last thing we want to do is compromise an active investigation, but there's at least tell us there's an active investigation. At least tell us that you're looking into things. Let the people know. Yeah.
Even in the worst possible crimes, like there are so many crimes that we cover that we think, this feels bad to tell people about what happened to this poor person. But I mean, inevitably, I'm always shocked by, we'll get someone will write us an email or whatever and tell them, oh, I didn't realize this happened to someone else. And now I can go to law enforcement and get that prosecuted. Like, I'm a firm believer in letting people know the absolute truth, because I think that's when the best outcomes happen. So I mean, it's a crazy case.
It is a crazy case.
Honestly, I'm surprised that it was never a national media, because it seems like.
Yeah. And again, that goes back to what I was saying before, as Molly was not picture perfect college student. She was living on the edge a little bit.
She was doing a rebel thing. She was rebelling. I mean, everything we talk about, she just got into an argument with her mom. I think a couple days beforehand.
And they thought she was a runaway, and they just chalked it up to that. And when they chalk it up to a runaway, they don't really, I covered the West Mesa serial killings. It's the same thing. It's like all those girls were considered runaways, but it doesn't matter. This should get national attention as well. I know you can't cover every single case nationally, but this case, there's something else going on here.
Yeah, it smells fishy for sure. Yeah. The runaway thing bothers me too. And I think that I wasn't there when KXII first covered it, but I do know that anytime there's a runaway now, my boss is like, yeah, we got to get that on air no matter what. So I'm not sure if that factored into it, but we do care.
I think it's great. Your station's been amazing with this case. So that's awesome.
We've been lucky enough in our work in true crime to meet a lot of amazing people in law enforcement.
Jodi Barth is a pioneer. She has paved the way for women as a CSI tech and a division commander for the Illinois Department of Law Enforcement.
Jodi has over 30 years of experience investigating homicides, and we are thrilled to have her perspective on this case. Here's what she had to say.
Hello?
Hey, Jodi. It's Cindy and Rob.
Hey, hi, Cindy.
How are you
guys? I'm fine. How you doing?
Good. We're so excited to have you today.
Yes, very excited.
I'm excited to be here.
So why don't we start off? Why don't you just describe who you are and what your background is for the audience, and just kind of get everybody up to speed on your expertise?
Sure. I actually spent my career over 32 years in law enforcement and investigations. First half of it, anyway, was in Illinois. Second half of it, I covered the U.S. and Canada. I started out in law enforcement as a deputy coroner. I then was hired by the Illinois Department of Law Enforcement as their first female CSI. I'm a fingerprint examiner. I then became a police officer and worked my way up to division commander. Second half of my career, I went into private work, and I became an internal fraud investigator for a global property casualty insurance company. I did white-collar crime that affected our company. I was also a licensed PI in North Carolina. And then in 2015, I retired, and I became the author of CSI Old.
Okay, tell me a little bit about the book.
The book is actually nonfiction, writing about some of my experiences. The first part of the book kind of gives just a general background of how I got there and what it was like going through some of those things, working with county sheriffs that really did not appreciate a woman doing those that kind of job, how it was going through the academy, how it was with my coworkers and colleagues. I loved every day of it. I took 6 cases that were important to me. It was a great career.
Yeah. Well, sounds like you were really good at it. So
I loved it. Yeah.
Fantastic.
I mean, the first time I ever saw CSI work, I knew that's what I wanted to do.
Fantastic. Well, you've been listening to the podcast and you kind of you've kind of got a crash course into this case. We'd love to hear your perspective from both a investigator and also from a CSI person.
I believe that the case is still open with the Fed. So I don't want to say anything that's going to jeopardize that, but I think what I'd be addressing is what I already heard on the podcast. As a CSI person, I'm appalled, to put it mildly. And I'm not trying to offend anybody or criticize anybody, but it's just the truth from what I see with the physical end of it. I think one thing we have to address is that search warrant that was denied. And I know people are upset because the judge denied it based on the fact there was no crime identified. The Fourth Amendment requires probable cause to get a warrant. Probable cause, the very first thing you have, there's virtually 2 components of probable cause. The very first one is a crime has to have had occurred. Second part is you have to show them that there's evidence of that crime where you want to search. And it's very specific. Dog hits, the cadaver dogs, there are multiple hits over a period of time in the same location using different dogs is beyond what they need. Scent dogs alerts are probable cause. They're considered probable cause, but you've still got to overcome the fact that there is no allegation of a crime. Really read that. We've put him in the car, put him there. We've got the phone calls. You've got the phone records. Got where he's probably bleeding. He told his best friend on the phone he was throwing up blood. One of them said that his bone was sticking out or something, so that would be a compound fracture, which usually bleeds pretty heavily. He could have laid there and died from exposure, too.
That's what the investigator, he contends. He says 2 things happened. Either he died from the injury and exposure, and if that's the case, then his body should still be there.
Isn't that enough for probable cause?
But if his body's not there, then it had to be transported somewhere.
Here's where the physical evidence comes into play. You had a 2012 Honda Accord that was there. It took them 2 weeks to find it. Whatever happened to that car, was it processed? By whom? Where is it? Where did it go? What was in it? There should be a complete inventory. I don't know if any of that was done. That could have given evidence that there was violence. You have the gun and the knife. If they haven't already done it, could they still do it? And could it connect back to the crime? And I'll tell you how. The gun fingerprints are probably a non-issue at this point. But depending on how close, if the gun was used, depending on how close the gun was to the victim, there could be blowback, what we call blowback, inside the barrel, which would be DNA. So that would, now you have evidence that somebody's DNA is inside the barrel of the gun. The only way that can get in there is if it's tissue that's blown back when the person is struck with a bullet. And we have Khan stating in Jessica's presence, he didn't know she was there, according to her, that he shot Colt between the eyes. I think OSBI has the gun, but I don't know if they did any tests on it. Did they look in the barrel for DNA? Did they swab it? I don't know.
According to what we've been told by third parties, is that the gun was tested, and I think Phil Klein talked about this because he asked them if the gun was tested because he handed it over to the OSBI, that the tests were inconclusive. Now, what kind of tests they did, no one knows.
Right.
Okay, they did trace the gun serial number.
Right, it was stolen.
It was stolen from like little less than a mile from Con Nip's house where he lives.
And also when Con Nip was in jail, he was given access to the evidence room. So we have no idea because he went to jail after this. So
for something else.
For something else. So we don't know, like, did he have access to this gun and machete?
Did it have a removable handle on it? Is there a hilt on it? They take that off and test underneath it because blood, they may have thought that they wiped that thing clean, but there might be DNA, blood, down into the hilt of it or down into the handle of it. You can't see it, but it's there and it's protected. Did they do that? I don't know. I'm just...
There's so much we don't know about the evidence chain.
Right.
And I think what you said earlier about the way the scene, because it wasn't treated like a crime scene, because it was very ad hoc. They were assuming that these kids were runaways, and so they didn't bother looking. They didn't find the car after 2 weeks, but they didn't look for it.
Right.
Very suspicious because Paula and her family were looking for Molly not far away from where the car was found on the same day. So they knew that Paula was in the vicinity looking for the car. People were watching her. Colby Barrack was watching her. So we don't know if they moved the car there that day and then called the deputies to come look, or if the car was there the whole time.
Right. There might have been evidence in it, and I don't know if it was processed. But
apparently, from what we know, they have the car. It's shrink wrapped, and they have it, but I don't know what's been done to it.
We have photographs of what was inside the car. They said there was nothing.
Oh, good.
They did say that there was nothing inside the car, but we don't know what tests they did. Usually when we ask law enforcement to show us when we're doing a show what was tested forensically so we can accurately discuss it on the show, they'll give us a file and it'll say, well, we tested for this, and then we tested for this, and we tested for this. We didn't get any of that. All we have are photographs.
It's confusing. That's the problem with this case, is there was so many gaps in the investigation.
And then there's the whole freezer back of the camper and the camper being cleaned. Is there anything still there that you could possibly connect to a homicide? And definitely DNA. If we can, if they could find any of Molly's or Colt's blood under the flooring in the camper, if they could, of course, if the freezer is still there, if there's any DNA inside that freezer. The other thing is a pond at Brianna's former property. Did they ask the new owners?
That's the problem. We don't know.
The pond behind Brianna's house, there's question marks on whether or not that was actually searched in the beginning of the investigation. So we're not sure 100% if it was or not.
Right. Phone records, you have the ping information. I wish they would have gotten Joe Russell's phone records, because it would have been interesting to see where he was that night. The other thing I thought of, and I don't think that, this isn't a possibility anymore, but, Khan's mother was arrested for DUI not long after this happened, and when she was arrested, she had a .25 caliber on her. I think it was 25. She had a semi-automatic pistol with her. That gun, I don't know if they would have looked at that gun for any reason or kept it. I don't know, for something.
Well, take us through the law enforcement perspective on what do law enforcement do with a case like this when they have all this circumstantial evidence, all these theories and people coming out. They've interviewed a lot of people, but it's been spread out over small departments and federal agencies. What is OSBI thinking right now? Are they just sitting and waiting for more information, or do you think they're...
Depends on what they found that we don't know about. There's all kinds of options that they have that they could be preparing for, but it depends on what they've found. There is a jump from suspicion to probable cause. You have to have more than suspicion, but less than complete certainty something is there. And that can come from informants. It can come from physical evidence. It can come from your own observations. But you have to piece that together. So you have to connect the dots. There are prosecutions, successful murder prosecutions, where the bodies have never been found, but they're very rare. If they're in a freezer at the bottom of a lake, the skeletons will still be there. They were left out in the open. I know what I would probably be doing, but I don't know what they're doing.
What would you do?
I'd be looking to get wiretaps. I'd be looking to pull phone records as much as I could.
Do have phone records. There's a lot of phone records.
At this point in time, phone records probably aren't going to do you much good. You probably can't even, if you don't have them now, you probably can't get them back that far. Circumstantial cases are convicted all the time, and circumstantial cases in their totality can be very compelling. But in this day and age, with DNA, with the advanced techniques we have, with APHIS, where they get a hit back in 27 minutes from the database all across the country.
Could they, if they took because we were told that they took a sample of some of the dirt from that burn pit, which the dogs hit on and with blood pathogen.
Right.
Could they take that dirt and run a DNA test on whatever blood pathogen that's in that dirt and connect it, see if it's either Molly or Colt's?
I mean, I would certainly give it a shot. If they can get a DNA sample, they could definitely ID it to Colt or Molly. As I understand it, they have DNA profiles on both of them.
Yeah.
So that's why I said if they haven't checked the inside of those barrels for DNA, they need to do that of the guns, because there could very well be blowback bits inside there.
Girl, real talk. This whole "it's new year, time to reinvent myself" trash is not the vibe for 2024. You can find someone who loves you for you, as you are. You don't need to read a stack of self-help books, only eat sad salads, or start meditating at 5 a.m. to be ready for dating. So yeah, my advice is to download Bumble and find someone who embraces you the way you are right now. Let me know how it goes.
Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, streaming January 25th, only on Netflix.
When you put a gun up close to somebody and you pull the trigger, that goes straight up the barrel of the gun, some of that, and their DNA would be inside the barrel of that gun. So if they haven't checked that, they need to still do that, because that's still a possibility. This case was really messed up from the beginning with regard to physical evidence and the ability to prove this was a homicide without the bodies, or that there was even violence.
Yeah, I mean, there was a car chase, and
right,
they never saw them.
But we know they were in the car. I mean, they laid that out beautifully in the search warrant. We know they were all there. We know through the phone conversations or the text messages that Khan abandoned them there.
Because Khan knew that Colt was out there with a broken leg, and he left him there. Doesn't that make him responsible for this, regardless if he killed him or not?
I would certainly try that. There is no duty to help anyone criminally. There's no criminal duty. There's a difference between morality and criminality. The fact that he left them out there, actually denied knowing they were even out there, was horrible. But I don't know if that's criminal. It probably would have been a great way to file a civil suit for wrongful death. It's worth a shot. Anything's worth a shot, but there is a tough case. It is a very tough case. I think it had a good shot of being solved quickly. This is going to be a tough one. I think it's going to take a miracle to get. Yeah,
I agree.
Or somebody's eventually going to flip and is going to, give the truth.
Well, people are telling us things that sound legitimate, but we're not.
Oh, they sound great.
No, it's stuff that we haven't even released yet, and they are not being taken seriously by law enforcement.
One of the statements we've been getting from some of the investigators, meth is rampant in that area. And it obviously was the clues to what happened here, because they were dealing meth, they were using meth, acting crazy. And that's what kind of was the flashpoint for this whole crime. Investigators saying, oh yeah, so-and-so talked, but he's just a meth head. We can't take anything he says for real.
Right.
But we have a recording, which we released a little bit of it, of this one witness who was running with these people. It's been identified that he has been running with these people, and he gives a level of detail, and he doesn't know he's being recorded, because in Oklahoma you can do that, because it's only a one-party state. Right. He was recorded without his knowledge, and he gave a level of detail that connects both the evidence that they have and a lot of things, including the machete. It connects a lot of the evidence.
Is that the kid that said he was tied up to the tree?
One of them.
Because his story was fascinating to me from an interrogation standpoint.
I'm curious to know why you think that.
It's from years of talking to people, I guess. You could tell he was genuinely struggling. He wanted to give the information, but he was genuinely struggling to get that information out in the section that I heard. I don't know. Obviously, that's not his full interview or his full recording. But that small piece was so detailed. He saw Molly. There is allegedly an eyewitness out there who saw what happened to her. Nobody can force him to talk.
He did talk.
He talked to Paula twice. One time
Right.
he talked to her while he was in jail over a video phone in a cell surrounded by a bunch of other inmates.
Because right after this happened, after she spoke to him the first time, he got arrested for something.
He's eventually going to have to testify.
I agree. Whether or not they bring him in as a witness, because I think they've
Right.
discounted and discredited what he said.
I
What
mean,
happens is that they'll talk to Paula and they'll say one thing, and then when they get into the hot seat, they don't tell the whole story, because it's happened numerous times.
Right, and it will continue to, especially in that culture. Those are very scary people. That is one thing that is universal throughout all their stories, and they are 100% accurate. Those are very scary, very dangerous people out there, and they know that they're putting their life on the line if they come forward with this, and that's unfortunate, but it's the truth. If he gave some details that involved the machete, and let's say there's a hilt on that machete or there's a handle on that machete, and they removed those and tested for DNA, there could still be viable DNA underneath that. There could be viable DNA in that camper, even though they think they cleaned it. Blood has a way of getting in places you'd never imagine. If they could get this to a homicide investigation, if they could get the probable cause to get inside that camper, if it even still exists, treat it with luminol. The blood may still be. If it's still there, it's probably testable. It's probably viable for DNA. There are still some options that I see to connect circumstantial evidence with other physical evidence that may or may not be. Physical evidence is still circumstantial evidence. It's not direct evidence. Direct evidence is usually, I was there and I did this and I did that and I saw this and I saw that. But physical evidence is all circumstantial, even though we can pinpoint identifications like a fingerprint, DNA, you can narrow it down to one person. I would want to make sure that that pond on Brianna's property was fully searched, was fully drug, just in case, and especially if that freezer's not there anymore. Freezer's still behind the camper. Where did it go? If it's not there, where did it go? That dump site seems more probable to me. And as far as the burn pit goes, very, very, very difficult to burn a body all the way. So if they burned those bodies, they took the remains somewhere else. It takes a long time to burn bones, to burn a body. Very high temperatures for a long time.
What about the caustic soda we were talking about?
Caustic acid?
Yeah.
I'm sure that would be just to dissolve the flesh. It's very hard to get rid of.
What do you suggest that they should do with the burn pit? Possibly could still be evidence there.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely think that they should still excavate the creek bed, the burn pit, under the tree. He, in fact, had a compound fracture and was throwing up blood. There was a lot of blood there. So yeah, I would say they should still do those excavations to it, or they can find compelling evidence elsewhere. An excavation like that is this long after is going to be very difficult, because when you excavate like that, you can't just take a bulldozer in there and start digging up dirt. I mean, you have to do it like an archaeological dig, and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of manpower to do that. But all you have to do is start finding some bones, some bone fragments. May be able to get some DNA from it. May not, depending. But you may be able to. So there's still possibility. The barrels of the guns, the machete, the camper, freezer, the pond, the burn pit. I mean, there's still options, but they have to make that connection to ruling out anything but a homicide. Does that make any sense?
No,
it makes full sense, but in the same respect, no one came out of that area. They went in there and they never came out. Right. So logic tells you they must still be there. One of them must still be there, or someone moved them.
Right. That's all logical, and it's emotional, but I would say 9 times out of 10, cases like this get solved years later because they find new evidence that produces DNA that they can then match back to the victim. Or 2, somebody steps forward and gives corroborating evidence that will prove it. I saw it. This is what happened. I couldn't even believe that somebody else but Molly called 911. Josh Davis told that by Colt that he was throwing up blood. Would you not think that you would call 911 and say, hey, our friends are lost in the woods. We got to find them? Did they?
No, they did not.
No. So you've got this code of silence around everybody. They want to handle it themselves and not bring the police in. But I say that tongue in cheek, knowing that Joe Russell was in charge of that part of it.
Key witness, the one that was last seen with them, Con Nip, wasn't questioned until 2.5 weeks later by his cousin, Joe Russell, about this.
Right. Ridiculous. Russell should have recused himself that night. That night he should have called the state in, take over that whole thing. But, you know, he didn't. And I'm sure there's a reason he didn't. And I would love to be able to see where he was that night by his phone record. Even just little things that I gleaned from the search warrant about the fact that when Con finally told the four people that went to his house, Nichols and that group, that when he finally was telling them where to go search, and he told them to go to where the Mustang was, the Mustang, he did the same thing with the Mustang, tore it up and left and abandoned it in almost the same spot. Well, I mean, that's a pattern of behavior. Were they running insurance frauds too on top of everything else? It's a pattern of behavior. Whatever happened to that car? Did Joe Russell really have a salvage yard?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so did he come and get it? It's little things like that. It's like, oh my God, this is infested. They're infested down there with corruption.
So looking at this case, what was the most glaring thing from law enforcement perspective about it? The thing that stood out to you the most as being part of a corrupted environment?
Well, definitely how it was handled from the beginning. I understand why law enforcement generally will code something missing persons right off the bat. This was different, though. They had information that there were 2 people alive and lost out there. And the fact that they did not turn that into an immediate search condition, I'll never know. It was like they ignored that fact and just chose to believe that they were missing. But the fact, I guarantee you, when you've got people communicating by phone like they were, it's not like they wanted to run off. They were calling for people to come get them. To me, law enforcement should never have assumed this was a missing person, that 2 kids just ran off. Because once they did that, they've lost most of the effort that they might have gotten had they gone out there right away. It was corrupted from the start. So everything fell as a result of that. What Paula has done is nothing short of heroic. My heart goes out to her and her family. She has done a tremendous job in bringing information relentlessly forward, and for it to still be in limbo is kind of surprising.
For the most part, if this was done in an area that had the resources, law enforcement resources, that we'd be having this conversation right now?
No, I think this was very solvable very early. From everything I've seen here, I think it was very solvable very early on. Sad to say this, but DAs and state's attorneys, they need to brag on their numbers. They need to produce numbers. They don't want to prosecute anything they might lose. That's why there's so many plea agreements and to unclog the courts. But, you know, they want those positive numbers.
When you deal with cases where there's no body, there's no physical body,
right,
how do law enforcement investigators treat that? Does it get put on the back burner because they know if they don't have a body, it's going to be a hard case? Because we've been told numerous times that they say that they only got 1 shot at this. Is that true?
If they get a search warrant and they go and they excavate and nothing's there, that's it. You only get 1 shot. You only get 1 shot under that search warrant. There's nothing to preclude you from getting additional search warrant. I can only tell you how I'd feel, and I wouldn't put it on the back burner. I mean, I don't think I could sleep at night if I put it on the back burner. They didn't come out of there.
Exactly. I was talking about the fact that if law enforcement sees that there's no body and knowing all the information that the bodies are probably not around anymore and that they've been discarded, destroyed, that they're not going to have a case. So are they going to drag their feet on this because they're not going to have a strong case?
But this case has an abnormal amount of potential information that from people that appear to be willing to talk.
That's what's bizarre to me.
Bizarre.
You're in the middle of
It's
nowhere.
bizarre from the very beginning.
This is a 17-year-old girl who went missing and a 22-year-old boy. You're just going to pretend it didn't happen?
Right. It's bizarre and it's
But why do you think they're doing that?
No, I think in the beginning, Joe Russell had a lot to do with it. I think not a very nice person and probably a very dangerous person. That's just my impression that I get. And when he's in authority, I mean, he could do whatever he wanted to do. And I think people knew that. But he's gone. He's long gone. So why?
Do you think they're trying to run out the clock and hopefully it'll just go away?
Well, murder never goes away. There's no statute of limitations on murder. It would have been great. I think it would have been great if they would have gotten a wrongful death civil suit filed, because that would have given them at least discovery.
Can they still do that?
Well, I looked up Oklahoma's civil law for wrongful death, and the statute requires it to be filed within 2 years. However, there is a possible exception in the case of if evidence comes to light later, that it might start the clock ticking later. I would say it'd be worth a shot to look at. They could go after Kahn for wrongful death. And here's the beauty of civil to get information is that the preponderance of evidence is a far less burden of proof. To me, basically what they would have to show is that the conclusion that Kahn was in some way responsible for Colt's death or Colt and Molly's death, it's 51%. You just have to have a majority of the lodge. You don't have that beyond a reasonable doubt burden of proof to hit.
So it's more logical.
Right. So you don't have the higher burden of proof. Plus, you still go through discovery phases. So you still subpoena, you take depositions, you get people under oath testifying. You know who did this was O.J. Simpson case.
Yep, the Goldmans, yeah.
Right. They used a civil, and I thought, oh gosh, I wish they would have filed a civil case against Kahn.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you can find out information from the civil matter that can be used in the criminal case that will help it. And plus, they might win the case.
Exactly.
So what would you suggest to do at this point?
I just feel so badly for Paula. I think she's exhausted. I think she has gone above and beyond, and I honestly kind of think that if somewhere in that whole thing, the answer is there. Somewhere in there is the truth. Where I would go, if I was taking over this case today, I would want to find some DNA that would link the suspects, the people of interest, back to a violent end for Molly and Colt. Whether that's their DNA inside the barrel of a gun, whether it's DNA, even in the car. I mean, even though we know they were in the car, if you could find it in blood serum, that would make it better than just perspiration. You might have to take the plumbing apart in the camper. Just go in behind the countertop or on the floors. Blood pools, and it seeps through things, and then it's protected. But that's what I would be trying to find, is I'd be trying desperately to find some kind of proof positive that they died from homicide, and you have to make that jump. Because right now, they're sitting on the fact that there's still 2 runaways.
They can't sit on that at this point.
They
shouldn't sit on that. They should at least rule it out. They should look at every piece that could possibly give them DNA.
She was declared dead last year. They're not runaways. And because she's Chickasaw, the FBI was supposed to pick up this case.
Now, because of this new McGirt law, it's actually gone back and forth. It was initially supposed to be a federal case. Now it's gone back into OSBI's.
So she was just declared dead last year?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think they could consider still a civil case against Kahn.
The 2 big names that come up in this are Kahn and Colby.
Right.
1 or 2 things, and then they get them in an interview room. They're going to have to flip in order to get a deal.
That would be the 90 percentile that I would say you have to do. I mean, there's still a chance that there's something out there that will connect through DNA. If it's hidden down in the barrel of a gun, it's still there, and it's still viable. You don't need a lot.
I just don't understand the fact that Kahn was the driver. It's documented that he was running from police. He did it regularly because he knew he could get away with it.
Right.
And then, we know that Molly and Colt were in the car with him. We can establish all that stuff. And then they don't exist. But he's the last person to see them. So I don't understand how he can just get away with something like that.
As an investigator, it can drive you crazy. In this particular case, I have no doubt that these people, Con, Colby, they will spend the rest of their life more or less in prison. They're not going to change now. They're not. It's possible that might get arrested for something that's going to put them in prison for a long time, and they might try to lighten their load by coming clean about this case. You never know where that's going to lead, but I just think there's plenty here. The cadaver dogs alone, you had at least 4 or 5 dogs over a period of months that searched different areas, and they all hit independently on the same area. That's huge information. I don't know if it's enough to get a conviction, though.
It's enough to get a warrant, though.
Exactly.
That's the thing that drives me crazy. It's enough to get a warrant. There's two sides of the spectrum on dogs. One side of law enforcement like it, the other part discredit it. When it's used for drugs, they're going to search a car if a dog hits.
So if a dog is hitting on human remains in this area, why aren't they searching there? This is a 17-year-old kid.
They should be searching on that. That whether or not scent dog and their handler's testimony is accepted. And it is. It is. According to the Supreme Court, it is. And cadaver dogs don't hit on anything else, but human remains in. It wasn't just one dog. It was 4 or 5 dogs. These are trained dogs.
Federally approved.
Right. That is acceptable probable cause according to the Supreme Court. In and of itself, nothing else. Just that. They have eyewitnesses that saw her tied to a tree, and apparently one that actually saw what happened to her. That's huge. I'm at a loss.
Yeah.
Of why this is still going.
We agree.
So are we.
And for the most part, homicides occur between people that know each other.
And these people knew each other.
Right. Sheriff knew all of that.
He could care less what happened to Molly and Colt.
Well, I think there's a larger theory here that everyone knows in that area that during Joe Russell's reign, 16-year reign there, that he was running a criminal enterprise.
Right.
He was doing things how he wanted to do them. He controlled the jails. He controlled that county. He controlled who he hired and fired. And he would let people off. And he was considered a good guy for some people, for the guys doing the bad thing. But he wasn't helping create safe environment in that area because drugs are rampant there. Rampant. They're all cooking meth.
It's obvious that there's some really big problems there. Case isn't open for 9 years.
So what are they saying when they're saying this case is still open? Is it a way for them not to share information?
Perhaps. I know that the FBI will not share information, even with the people who refer the case to them.
Is it fear that they just don't want to get egg on their face, that, it's going to expose certain things they have not done right? I mean, because that's what it seems.
Seems to me like that. Once it got to the OSBI, see where they would have egg on their face.
There's a problem with the OSBI. Back then, in 2013, there was a OSBI agent who was very close with Joe Russell.
He was the one who sifted dirt out of the burn pit with a Mountain Dew can. That's the level of forensic.
With a Mountain Dew can?
Level of expertise that they did forensically with that.
So what do you think about that?
You might as well be in a sandbox with a pail and that's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And even not having been there, it's totally wrong. Even if you don't have anything with you, that dirt isn't going anywhere.
Can you tell us what should have happened for them to test that dirt? What would have been the process?
So first of all, you have to know what you're looking for. So in this case, you're looking at dirt, not to find out what kind of dirt it is. You're looking to find out if there's any blood or body fluid that is going to hit on a DNA match. So you have to take it with sterile equipment. You have to make sure that it's protected. You can't do it without gloves because you could be one of the 5% of the people that transmit their blood type through their body fluids. You have to do it under sterile conditions. So the container you collect it in, the container you put it in, all of that has to be sterile and it has to be separate from everything else. You have to keep a complete chain of evidence on it, just like any other piece of evidence. But you can't collect it with a dirty can. I mean, that's insane. You still might get the DNA out of it, but it might be compromised too because of that, because the person who drank out of that can may have put their DNA on. It's corrupting the sample itself. So you just wouldn't do that. And the dirt's it's not like the dirt's going to go anywhere. Sit on it. So you can get the proper people and the proper equipment out there.
What was even more disturbing is that it was still so hot that Misty burnt herself. Like the dirt was still so hot. So obviously it was very soon after that fire.
Yeah. And you can't just that's the other thing. You can't just take one sample of dirt. Even if you had a pile of what looked to be human remains, you can't just take a sample from there. You have to take samples from around it too. You have to show that it's to have control samples when you're doing stuff like that too.
Baselines.
Exactly. If I was a defense attorney, I'd ask them the history of that can. Who drank out of it last? In this day and age, it's very unprofessional. Maybe in the 50s and 40s, it would have been acceptable, but not today.
It just comes down to they just didn't take this seriously.
I think that you're exactly right that they wrote this off as missing persons, but I'm telling you, Joe Russell knew better. Joe Russell knew that they were out there. You can't tell me that Kahn didn't tell him they were out there. But knowing that or thinking that and proving it are two different things.
Well, we do have the statement here from the 23rd. Where Kahn tells Joe Russell in the statement that Colt was out there and that Colt had a broken ankle and Colt couldn't leave. I mean, some very bad men were going to come and get him.
Yep.
That's what he wrote in the statement. So Joe Russell, on July 23rd, we have proof that he knew that they were out there.
He never did any kind of a search, did he?
Nope.
He watched other people looking for them. That's the whole thing. Yeah. He would watch. They would all sit there and watch when Paula would come back with her family and be searching the grounds, and they would just sit there and watch. Yeah. And then the Nips would watch from their property line with guns. Because
Colt, in this statement that Kahn made with Joe Russell, Kahn spoke to Colt on the telephone and told... Right. And Colt told him where he was, said, you know where you left me. Tell them where I am. He said, I'm bleeding and I have a broke ankle.
Had they gone out there, they would have seen the blood. They would have seen it. It would have been easy to collect.
2 weeks.
2 weeks after Molly and Colt went missing, Kahn makes a statement to Joe Russell saying that Colt was out there. He knows he was out there, spoke to him on the phone, and he knew that Colt was hurt. On July 23rd, shouldn't Joe Russell have gone out there to look for him?
Definitely. Of course, anybody would do that. Or if I was Kahn's father or mother, I would go out there right away.
And you would think that Joe Russell, who's got a relative who's involved in a high-speed police chase, who was a result of these missing people. Number one, he should have recused himself, as you said earlier. Number two, you'd think he'd feel more obligated to figure this out, which leads me to believe that he was hiding something and he's trying to cover up something.
I agree 100% with that statement. I agree 100% with that, and I'm fully on board with that. I think that's why I said I wish they would have pulled his phone records for that night, because I suspect you would have seen pings to his phone in that area, either that night or early the next morning. Doesn't make sense to me from a law enforcement standpoint. It just doesn't. Why you wouldn't search that area as soon as you knew it occurred. The car was 700 feet from the creek area.
Yeah.
That's nothing. 700 feet?
Yeah.
But at least Molly's family, they might want to counsel and see if they have a shot at a civil suit for wrongful death. And maybe that can be against more than Kahn. It's certainly worth looking at. Everything comes out then. The discovery brings everything out then in public.
Well, I think the most important part of that would be the discovery of all the information. Maybe find something that could be that one missing piece of this puzzle that we have sitting here that could link everything together.
Right. There's just a plethora of evidence here, of circumstantial evidence, but that by no means that it's not prosecutable or it's not solvable. It just has to be connected. It has to be connected in a way that it's accepted as fact in court. And that's what hasn't been done. Still think there's a lot they could check. What you have so far, somebody needs to put it together. Maybe the civil avenue would be a great one for them. Certainly check it out.
Well,
And
thank you.
I'm pretty sure law enforcement is not going to want them to do that.
No, they just want this to go away.
Yeah,
and that's
they want
right.
Paula to go away.
Jackie even told us that. He
Yeah.
told us on the podcast they wanted this
Right.
just to go away. They're only reacting after Paula comes up with something.
Yeah, right. And that's so pitiful. The other avenue, too, is through tribal pressure and maybe going to the AG, to the state AG.
Yeah. Well, and there hasn't been any attempts yet. So I think that's part of the reason we wanted to do the podcast, is to create a social environment for people to understand, even the people that live in that area. They know about this case, but they're just starting to find out through the podcast the level of information with this case.
It's incredible. I have no other words for it. I can't explain lack of interest in the beginning because it's not a typical missing persons case. Typical missing persons case is they're gone. This one, they're not gone. We know they're not gone, and we know they're hurt, or at least one of them is hurt. Wouldn't you think they'd want to get EMTs out there? Wouldn't you think it's just mind-boggling to me.
How many times have the state police that you work for, if a car disappears, they just walk away from it?
No.
No follow-up, no additional
no.
investigation. They just like, oh, the car disappeared. Let's just walk away. Let's go home.
Normally what happened, number one, you've probably got the license plate of the car. Whether it's legit or not is a different story.
They knew it was Con.
Con-Nip's girlfriend owned the car, and she ended up going to jail for insurance fraud.
Right. Even if they lost sight of that car, you would get your butt over to Con's house or Sabrina or to her place. But you'd be pursuing that person for running from you. Even if you lost sight of the car, or even if, and this happens, where police will terminate a search because dangerous to other people. That wasn't the case here. They weren't going to run into any parked cars or any pedestrians or anything like that. But in this case, even if you terminate and you know you have any information, you're going to continue to look for that car. You're going to continue to look for that person. That's just standard operating procedure. You're not going to just forget about it.
They were more worried about hurting the patrol cars than finishing the chase. That was one of the reasons that was given. They didn't want to destroy one.
I don't buy it.
They knew where he was going. They know where Con lives. This is a small town. It's like 2 streetlights.
Right.
They
right.
knew he.
I'd be there to meet him. That would be where you'd go. All of that is bad police work. If you're just ignoring that kind of stuff because of who he is, of course that's bad police work. But it takes it a step further in that the information was available that night that Colt was hurt and that Colt and Molly were out there. It's not a typical missing person. They didn't disappear. They were there. They didn't disappear, run away on their own. Actually, if you know one's hurt, you're going to want to put people out there right away. That area is dangerous anyway.
That's why I thought Jackie Bates's theory about negligent homicide, from a logic standpoint, it makes sense. From a legal standpoint, I don't know if you can do that, but they knew that he was hurt. They knew he couldn't get himself out of there. He was responsible for where Colt was, no doubt.
He left them there. They were both alive and well. It was wrong what he did anyway, to leave them there, especially to deny that they were out there.
Yeah.
Bad enough. But from a legal standpoint, there's a difference between morality and legality.
Yeah, we're going to be releasing some recordings here in the next couple weeks. So we'd love to hear your perspective after we drop some of these bombshells that we have.
Sure.
All we're going to continue to do is just get the information out there. They all know each other. It's a good old boys network down there.
And I'm very familiar with that from a personal standpoint.
Yeah.
Even. Yeah, anything I can do to help, I'd be glad to. They may have had a questionable lifestyle, but they still had value. You know,
they're kids. They were kids.
Value.
I mean, who doesn't do crazy stuff when they're like in 17 and 20?
And actually, they're kind of isolated there. I mean, when that's all you have around you, it's kind of hard to go against that.
Not just the kids that are doing the meth. It's the adults, too.
Right.
We really appreciate you spending the time talking to us.
You two guys are awesome, and I truly mean that. It is so refreshing to talk to people who have the ability and the desire to get stuff like this done.
Oh, thank you.
Next time on Partners in True Crime.
We are going to be releasing a recording next week with some horrifying details about what happened. Paul is going to walk us through it, and it's definitely an episode you do not want to miss.
If you or anyone you know is suffering from a methamphetamine addiction, please contact the American Meth Addiction Hotline.
If you or anyone you know has been the victim of sexual abuse, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
For any tips relating to the disappearance of Molly Miller and Colt Haynes, please contact 833-4-MOLLY and Colt, and they will be directed to the proper law enforcement agency.
All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content. Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and listen to Vi's original song, Take Me Back, written for Molly Miller.